I think God might be real, just not in the way you think. By Weather's writing. Part 4. We pulled off the I-51 a little after midnight, stopping at a truck stop, which was crouched between the highway and a large forest. We waited in the van for 10 minutes or so. Trent had increased the sonar radius to its maximum of 30 miles a little over an hour ago. Somehow the red pings had kept up with us, holding a steady distance of around 20 miles. Considering we were averaging around 80 miles an hour, and a coyote's top speed is only around 40, we figured they'd been enhanced in some way. Either that, or they shapeshifted into something faster. Regardless, now that we had stopped, we waited to see if the demon spawn would try and close the distance. Luckily, or unluckily, they didn't. They kept their 20-mile buffer, but we noticed they were beginning to spread out along the circumference of the boundary. We're close. They know that. So they're trying to trap us in, Trent said. Trying to? More like they have. We considered whether we should stay in the van and keep watch, but we figured that would do us little good. At their speed, they could be on us in 10 minutes, which means we would need to stay up all night and keep tabs on their positions. Trent offered to stay up, of course, but I shut him down. The demon doesn't want to kill us now. You said it yourself. Plus, we need our rest. If they come, they come. Trent didn't like it, but he acquiesced. The truck stop had all the essentials, a gas station and a mini-mart with showers and an attached McDonald's, a large parking lot for truckers to idle and sleep, and even a section with lodging for those who wanted a more comfortable night's rest. I told Trent that he should take advantage of the showers, and after a little convincing, he agreed. While he was cleaning himself up, I patrolled the dingy, half-stocked aisles of the Daisy's Quick Mart. I probably would have been appalled by the quality of the store, had I actually been paying any attention to it whatsoever. But I wasn't. I was thinking hard about what awaited me tomorrow. During the drive, I had asked Trent why the demon would want us to return to the crash site. What did he mean that I would be confronting a dark entity in a place he couldn't help me? He seemed hesitant to answer, but my little stunt outside the storage facility seemed to have sufficiently motivated him. When I said I've never done this before, I meant it, Trent started. I've never done this exact thing before, meaning I've never projected someone into the past. So I'm time traveling? I asked. No, don't think of it like that. Trent paused, trying to come up with a good explanation. It's more like I'm opening up a window for you to look through, not a door. You're going to see the past, but you can't interact with the physicalities there. But that doesn't mean you can't interact with anything. There was a space of silence as Trent tried to let me work out his meaning for myself. I don't get it. Are you saying there's something that I can interact with? Like what? Then it hit me. The demon. The demon can interact with me? Meaning what? It can kill me? Meaning, I'm not exactly sure. You're gonna be in a kind of psychic space. If it does damage, it won't be to your body. It'll be to your mind. Or spirit. I don't know what the limits of the damage could be. I just don't have those answers. If you've never done this, how do you know any of this will work? Well, that's an easy one, Trent answered. Because it's been done to me. There was silence. Look, if I know anything, I know my tech. Don't doubt that this will work. It's my job to make sure it does. I just need you to be in the right mental for this. Just because it knows you're coming doesn't mean it automatically has the upper hand. It won't be able to see you unless you make contact with it first. In other words, you have to initiate contact. As long as you remain a spectator, should be okay. Trust me. Just don't make contact. I started pacing faster, fast enough to catch the attention of an overnight shift worker, a young man whose name I can't quite remember. I know it started with a J. Jake, maybe? Anyway, he asked if I was all right, to which I responded with the affirmative. He left me alone for another couple passes, but when I almost ran into one of the shelves, he stood up and said, I'm gonna have to ask you to stop running around. I don't want you to hurt yourself. I must have stared daggers at him, because he recoiled from my gaze. What's gotten into me? I thought, then steadying myself, I apologized. I looked around and grabbed the nearest edible-looking piece of merchandise, a bag of Swedish fish. and placed it down on the counter. "Just this, please." The cashier rang me up. It was surprisingly cheap. Are you sure you're all right?" the young man asked. He was tall with brown hair. He seemed tired, maybe even more tired than me, but he also seemed kind. I smiled as best I could and said, "No, I'm not, but there's not really anything you can do." "Hell, and there might not be anything I can do." I furrowed my eyebrows at my own response, realizing that imminent death may have broke my verbal filter. On the other hand, the cashier did not seem surprised at all. "Ah, I see. It's one of those problems," he responded. "Well, hey, for what it's worth, you seem like one of the resilient ones. I think you'll be all right." I only smiled and nodded at his mildly cryptic comment. Looking back, the whole interaction was a bit strange, but I had way too much mental clutter to recognize that at the moment. I took my Swedish fish and walked through the anteroom, which led to a McDonald's. I found an open yellow booth that wasn't littered with crumpled straw sleeves and sat down, chomping mindlessly on my little red fish until Trent returned. When he arrived, he took my place, and I went over to shower. After we were both cleaned and fed, we returned to the van. The pings were still pushed safely outside of harm's way, but that didn't mean we were out of harm's way. Trent asked me if I wanted to sleep in the van, saying that it would be the safest place. I thought it over. He was right, obviously. The van was not only outfitted with weapons I couldn't even begin to understand, but it was also our escape. And it would be just as difficult, if not more difficult, to break into than the studio-style motel rooms with their wooden doors and big windows. Still, if this was going to be my last night on Earth, I wanted to sleep in a bed. A real bed. Trent understood and said he'd stay parked right outside my room for the night. After purchasing a key from the night attendant, I moseyed over to the cement walkways which connected the 20 or so rooms. Mine was room number 56, which I thought was a bit odd since, like I said, there were only 20 rooms. I lugged in my tomato plushie and Dad's old book and placed them on the queen mattress. "I'll be right outside," Trent said after I collapsed onto the bed. "Trent?" I called out, stopping him halfway through the door. "Yeah?" All the blood in my body rushed to my face as I realized my unfiltered mouth almost reflexively said the word, "Stay?" I stared at Trent, my heart beating, my face hot. I considered asking him to sleep on the floor like my dad, but that would be childish and impolite. The alternative was to share my bed, or I could take the floor. "I'll just be right outside," Trent said before my mind processed a solution. "Come by if you need anything. I'll be up most of the night anyway." "Okay," I replied in a faint voice. Trent shut the door. I sat atop the bed sheets and acquainted myself with the new living space. A feeling of regret closed over me as I considered that even sleeping on a car seat would have been better if it meant I didn't have to be alone. With a sigh, I turned on the bedside lamp and grabbed the book and stuffed tomato, using the tomato as a backrest as I slipped my legs under the covers and situated the book upright on my thighs. I cracked it open and I was immediately blasted with a puff of dusty old book scent. It was ripe at first, and I turned my head away to sneeze. But as I perused through the pages, the scent grew on me. It reminded me of my days growing up, when I'd step into my dad's study and read through one of the many volumes on cryptic topics, which were at least 2 college degrees above my Lexile range. I was only a couple minutes into browsing the collection of different scientific and philosophical works when I came upon a page which contained highlighted text. And this was unusual, as my dad would never mark up his books. He was a purist on that point. I rubbed my thumb over the yellow lines, and sure enough, it was highlighter. The highlighted text was part of a small book by Carl Jung called Synchronicity. There was a total of 3 pages that were marked, and they advanced like this. Page 5. "The philosophical principle that underlines our conception of the natural law is causality. But if the connection between cause and effect turns out to be only statistically valid and relatively true, then the causal principle is only of relative use for explaining natural processes. That is, as much to say as the connection of events may, in certain circumstances, be other than causal, and require another principle of explanation." Page 19. "There are events which are related to one another experimentally, and in this case, meaningfully, without there being any possibility of proving that this relation is a causal one, since the transmission exhibits none of the known properties of energy. A situation which does not yet exist and will only occur in the future could transmit itself as a phenomena of energy to a receiver in the present. Therefore, it cannot be a question of cause and effect, but of a falling together in time, a kind of simultaneity, a synchronicity. Page 22. A young woman I was treating had, at a critical moment, a dream in which she was given a golden scarab. While she was telling me this dream, I sat with my back to the closed window. Suddenly I heard a noise behind me, like a gentle tapping. I turned around and saw a flying insect knocking against the window pane from the outside, and I opened the window and I caught the creature in the air as it flew in. It was the nearest analogy of a golden scarab that one finds in our latitudes, a scarabaeid beetle, the common rose chafer, which, contrary to its usual habitats, had evidently felt an urge to get into a dark room at this particular moment. I flipped through the rest of the pages of the book, and there was no more highlighted text, but there was a message on the last page which read, Matthew 7:7-8. I'll meet you in the darkest place. He also included his typical smiley face, which had an ovular shape with 3 sprouts of hair, which I now realize kind of resembles my tomato plushie. It was my dad's writing, of course. But why? How? What did this mean? The motel had a Bible stashed away in the nightstand drawer. I got it out and looked up the verses, which read the following. Ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For every one that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. I spent maybe an hour ruminating on all of this. The whole discourse on energy and causality and a falling together in time just seemed so right. It was clear that my dad definitely did know what I was going through, but for whatever reason, he made it seem like he was oblivious. Why had he hidden that from me? I felt like I was being pulled in 2 directions. On one hand, my dad loved me enough to leave me this note, maybe even knowing the exact moment I'd need it. But on the other hand, he had neglected my struggles throughout my entire childhood. He even lied at times. Was this really enough to make up for all of that? And then there was the section about the future transmitting energy to the past. I read back through the whole paragraph, and the original writer had meant to say this as something that wasn't possible. But my dad's highlighting made it seem like he wanted to flip the meaning. The future does affect the past. I thought about where I was heading, and I wondered if I would soon discover that for myself. Lastly, Dad's message. The Bible verse reminded me of the first time I prayed, how I reached out to God and received peace as an answer to my prayer. Now I feel like I'm actively seeking something, but I don't know yet what I'll find. And then there's knocking. At first that reminded me of the story with the beetle tapping on the window, but then I went back even deeper in my memory and dug out a monster tapping on my window, and the words my dad spoke to me in order to set my mind at ease. You're a superhero. Do you know what your greatest superpower is? Your greatest power is that you get to tell the monsters what to do. Because the monsters are only as strong as the stories you tell about them. So if you're ever scared, honey, just dream up a better story. I was crying into my stuffed tomato now. I felt like all the blinking pieces of my life were finally being pulled together in a complete puzzle. This was all by design. My entire life filled with so much chaos and confusion was actually preparing me for this moment. And my dad thought I had the tools and strength enough to get through it. I flipped through the book one more time, thinking maybe he had left some other hidden comment, some formula to defeat the demon and return home. But there was nothing. Only that one comment. I'll meet you in the darkest place. What's the darkest place, Dad? Is that where I'm going? Are you saying you'll be there too? With all those thoughts in my mind, my eyes became heavy shutters which, with the slightest pressure on the pulley, winded shut. My swimming thoughts and firework-like fears dissipated, and I returned to a precious childhood memory. It was after an evening soccer practice, summer. Dad was driving me to Dairy Queen. I got a cherry-dipped twist cone. I was happy. So happy. I woke up to the sunlight blaring through my windows. Shit, I overslept, was my immediate thought. I threw off my covers and opened the front door. A glance at the clock showed 1:13 p.m. I shouldn't have even been allowed to stay checked in this long. Damn it. Am I going to be double billed for this? I heard a rummaging sound around the corner of my motel room. It sounded like a squirrel was trying to find an afternoon snack in one of the garbage bins. I stepped outside. The sun was extremely bright, to the point where I had to squint and put my hand over my eyes to even see the ground in front of me. I was trying to walk towards the van, but somehow I ended up in front of the trash bins where the animal's tail was sticking out from the turned-over silver garbage can. Its tail was wagging excitedly, and I remember thinking that it was much too large to be a squirrel. The animal bent down as if biting into something, and I heard the sound of its growl as it struggled to tug at whatever it was free from the barrel. Inch by inch, the creature backed out of the canister, and more of its sharp, sticky hairs were revealed. I heard something snap, then the creature leapt back, and I saw what it was chomping on. My eyes widened in horror as the pink tube of human intestine was pulled taut like the end of a tangled hose. Blood and entrails were spilling out of the human's open guts, and then behind the canine I saw a person's face. His face was pale white, his eyes closed, his hair was slicked back. It was Trent. Before I could react, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I whirled around and saw my dad, but no, it wasn't him. It was someone wearing a papier-mâché face mask that was painted to look like my dad. The forehead of the mask was already beginning to crack, white spots breaking off like sawdust. Through the cracks I could see the figure's true form. I didn't know darkness had its own type of light, but that's the only way I could describe it. It was as if malevolence itself was reified into the skin, which was actually an amalgamation of millions of little, oozing parasites that leached into the nearby light. When it finally spoke, the demon's voice was a full octave lower than the old man's at the deli, and it had an earth-stilling gravitas.
"Today's the day,"
he sang and reached into his pocket, his lips curled upward in a foxy smirk.
"You have no idea how long I've waited for this day,"
he said, and he held up the razor blade. Half his facade had already fallen apart, and now I could see the bugs up close, writhing in what was either horror or ecstasy. And his scent was somehow more rank than the rabid coyote rummaging through the trash can with Trent's cut-open body inside. The demon closed in on my position, and in one decisive motion, he brought the blade close to his chin, and then sliced across my throat.
"Wake up!"
I jumped out of my bed and grabbed my throat, feeling the cold sting of its quick slice. Hyperventilating, I patted down the area, trying to hold all the blood in. But when I removed my hands, I saw that they were dry. It was only a dream, I thought. Gray light was only beginning to filter through the drapes. I'm in my hotel room. I'm safe. I tried consoling, but the pragmatic mental messages weren't enough to hold the force of my knees buckling. I dropped onto the carpet and cried for a long while. Outside, rain was beginning to fall. By the time I met up with Trent, I had already composed myself and decided to keep my dad's message and the nightmare to myself. None of it seemed exactly productive from a logical standpoint anyway, and I wanted to focus on the mission. We stopped by a McDonald's and bought a couple cups of coffee. Trent asked if I wanted any food, and I declined. Black coffee seemed like it was the only thing my stomach could take at the present moment. I couldn't tell Trent I was hungry, but he tried playing it off, I guess to be respectful of me. I told him to knock it off and get something to eat. I didn't need my Caron getting lightheaded and dropping the paddle before he finished rowing me to hell. He didn't care much for my joke. But he ordered a couple of chicken McGriddles at the kiosk anyway. There were maybe 10 patrons spread throughout the restaurant, and we sat down in the same booth from the prior night, this time across from one another. Trent spent the first 10 minutes or so babbling about our fuel supply and the logistics of the trip from here on in. Practical stuff. I've come to realize that's how he deals with his stress. He talks it out in short, durable sentences. I mostly nod and watched as what looked like a storm closed in on the truck stop. The sky was overcast and there were darker clouds in the distance. The rain was still only a patter, but a middle-aged man wearing a yellow bow tie on the wall-mounted TV confirmed that there would be heavier rain and thunderstorms very soon. After the worker delivered Trent's food and he ate it in record time, I posed the one question that was still on my mind. How do I find him? I asked. Trent finished a large gulp of his coffee and then looked at me. It was the first substantial thing I'd said all morning. Trent could tell something was off with me, but he figured there was no point in asking what it was. By him, I assume you mean the demon. I nodded. Trent licked his teeth clean. You could try praying again. I'm serious, I responded. I'm serious too. It worked before, didn't it? You mean at my house? Trent nodded. I thought you weren't a religious man. I'm not. Just a practical one. If praying worked before, maybe it'll work again. Is that the best you've got? Maybe. No, I've got a lot of shit better than a maybe, he answered. It's just not accessible where you're going, which is why I recommended not making contact in the first run. First run? So we're going to be doing this more than once? At least, Trent answered. Then, seeing my expression, he continued, What? You thought this was going to be a one and done? We have to conduct some research first. I did tell you this was new for me, right? Somehow Trent's response had set my mind at ease a little. I was going to have more than one chance. Of course. Why wouldn't I be able to go back more than once? Why didn't you tell me this earlier? It would have gone a long way with easing my mind. Trent lifted his hands in defense. Sorry, I just thought that was a given. I mean, what we're doing is dangerous, just like I said, but it doesn't mean we aren't going to approach this safely and scientifically as possible. However, there is a different problem with running multiple trials. The organization? Well, that's right, Trent said like a proud parent. Our little experiment will be like a giant spotlight, and the longer we wait around after it's on us, the greater the chance we'll have unwelcome company. So, safe but speedy. Safe but speedy. Exactly. We fueled up and were back on the road a little after 8 o'clock. From that point on, Trent and I were absolutely silent. I had the distinct feeling of being in the eye of the storm. The pings moved closer commensurate with our progress towards the crash site. The cloud front continued its advance, and I noticed a haze beginning to descend on the road ahead of us. It was fog. We meandered further inland, the forest thickening around us until the rain almost stopped entirely, the leaves drinking it up before it fell on our windshields. I kept my eyes on the radar. We were approaching the large yellow circle, which indicated we had arrived. As we pulled closer, I began to feel things. Fear, eeriness, doubt, then happiness, hope, love. Normally feelings like these had a clear source to picture, but these sensations came in waves without any discernible reason. It was almost as if they were blinking into existence inside of me. Here we go, Trent said like an airplane pilot readying his crew for turbulence. I still recall the exact moment we crossed the boundary into the area of higher energy. It was like something just clicked in my brain, and all of a sudden everything felt so much closer. The sound of the rain against the trees was almost right next to my ears. The trees in the distance would oscillate between their position half a mile out, and then suddenly seem 5 meters away. If I focused on something long enough, it began to radiate those same ethereal particles as when Trent released Ava's phase lock. I checked to make sure the shifter wasn't set to TD, and sure enough, it was still in drive. Can you see them? Trent asked. The shifts? Yeah, I said in a dreamy voice. I felt like I was driving through Wonderland. It's the energy. I barely noticed a difference. A bit of movement in the trees, but not much else. But I'm sure for you, this is a whole experience. What is this? I raised my hand and caught some of the pixel dust dripping off the sun visor. It disappeared when it made contact with my hand. It's a kind of, a radiation. Everything emits it, just in different quantities. I'm still not exactly sure how it relates to the other realms, but I'm guessing it's some kind of primordial matter that helps connect our worlds. It's beautiful, I exclaimed. I wish I could see the world like this all the time. Maybe you will, Trent whispered. As we arrived at the crash site, I began to get glimpses of the past. My childhood dreams and memories were pushing their way out from my subconscious. I noticed an increased number of blinks, which were validated by Ava, who reported the following. Currently detecting 14,350 novel emergences and 2,777 controlled agents. Net anomalies, 2,777. That's a lot of blinks, I remarked. Why doesn't Ava include them in the net anomalies? Trent turned his head so I couldn't see his smirk. Because blinks aren't anomalies. I thought about it for a second. Blinks aren't anomalies. I never thought about it that way. It's hard to think about it that way when the normal, for most people, means not picking up on fundamental aspects of reality, but that doesn't make it any less real. We continued past the epicenter of the yellow circle. Why are we not stopping? I asked. I think we're already past the crash site. It doesn't have to be exactly at the crash site, Trent said. Plus, we don't want to stop on the side of the road and risk getting some civilian involved. There's a field about half a mile up ahead. I'm going to pull off the road and set up camp there. The field that Trent was referring to was actually a large clearing that dipped down into several trench-like troughs, which were filled to the brim with fog like witches' cauldrons. Further into the distance, I saw open fields, probably used for farming, and then a large hill where the trees once again reasserted themselves. We had pulled off the road and up a small incline where the trees had already been broken down, leaving a trail for us to drive through. When we surfaced at the edge of the clearing, Trent pulled up onto a flat bed of dried mud which was maybe 30 yards long. Here, he said with a sigh. We both sat for a minute, looking around the field. We'd finally arrived. The rain was beginning to pick up, and the dark sky made it almost impossible to discern the time of day. You ready? Trent asked. I looked at him. Really looked at him. In his blue eyes. Was I ready? Did it even matter? Let's do this, I said. This was the first time I was really able to inspect the back of Trent's van. He had talked up his gear a lot, and honestly I was impressed. And not in the way that a scientist is impressed by another scientist's lab. I wasn't that kind of expert. But it still seemed remarkably well managed. And now that I was in a state where my vision had been enhanced, I could actually see the enigmatic particles circulating through the pneumatic tubes which were coiled like pipes and valves of an elaborate wind instrument. The walls of the van itself were glistening white, making it easier to make out everything else inside. Along the floor were 5 overturned columns. Each column was dark and had a vibrating quality, as if they were charged with energy. Then, atop the center 3 columns was a smaller altar, which supported an apparatus with 2 skinny metal arms holding a silver halo. At present, the arms were folded, and the halo was suspended a few inches above the altar, face down. I thought maybe I'd see particles exuding from it. But instead, it was emitting visible waves which bent and warped everything they touched. That thing's emitting a lot of energy, I remarked, gesturing towards the halo. Trent stepped in between the columns and started pulling out the packages he had stuffed in there yesterday. Just wait till it turns on. Most of the packages contained only a single piece of equipment and were otherwise packaged with foam peanuts. We carefully removed each box and set them on the ground outside. I asked if the rain would damage the stuff inside, to which Trent only laughed and continued lugging out the boxes. When they were all out, Trent removed a box cutter from his pocket and went one by one opening them. There were 8 pieces in total. What is it? I asked as we fished the first item out. It's another apparatus like the one inside, except it'll mount to the ground out here. I pulled out what looked like a metal tripod. Good, that'll go at the bottom. Where are we setting it up? Over here, Trent said, and stepped 5 paces away from the van. He coordinated himself up so he was centrally aligned with the inner ring, then stomped a few times. This is the spot. As we continued to work, I asked Trent about how the whole contraption works. Do you remember the first time we were in the van, when we had to escape from the semi-truck? Trent asked and connected a secondary mounting apparatus to the top of the tripod. It had 4 spider-like legs that made right angles and stuck into the ground. Of course, I said. The phase lock. Yeah, Trent said, and gestured towards the metal stick that was in my hand. I handed it to him. The phase lock is a seal on the level of energy that the van is allowed to release. It also controls its dispersion pattern, so that it releases its energy in a steady wave. This allows Ava to scan for anomalies without causing us to become an anomaly. Trent stuck the plank into the neck of the tripod. So, when you released the phase lock, we started emitting more energy. That's right, Trent confirmed. Enough to create an alternate route through a different realm. So, we blinked into a different realm, and then back, just to avoid that truck. That's right. But why couldn't we just move out of the way? Because it had locked onto us. It was tracking our motion and adjusted its course based on the amount of energy we were emitting. So in order to escape, we had to radically skew our potential energy and then use it to shift. Couldn't he have just followed us? Trent connected 4 more pieces to the device, which now looked like an elaborate teepee. He was fishing in the last box when he spoke again. Yeah, he could have, but it was highly improbable that he would have found us. Trent returned from the bottom of the box with another silver ring in hand. Think of it like this. Let's say you're trying to escape from some bad guy who's coming after you, and you enter into a new room you've never seen before. Would you prefer this room to have 3 doors to go through, or 10? I thought about his riddle for a second, and then responded, well, it depends where they go. Trent fastened the ring to the top of the teepee. Well, let's say they all lead to random places. Or let's say they're all closets that lead somewhere. The key is more is better, because the more doors he has to check, the less likely he is to pick the correct one. Make sense? So we opened a bunch of doors and escaped through one at random, hence the gear TD for trap door. I marveled at the insights, but not for long. Trent hopped back up in the van and pulled a lever that I hadn't seen until now. The 2 metal arms raised the inner ring until it was perpendicular with the altar. Then Trent clicked one of the 3 red buttons along the back wall, and I saw what looked like a large glass eye suspended in a magnifying glass protruding from the wall, aligned with the center of both rings. A couple seconds later, the glass eye began to focus the energy which was being fed to it from the pneumatic tubes, and a blue pyramid of light projected from it into the first ring. Then from the first ring into the second ring, all 3 pieces were alighted at slightly diminishing heights, so the cylinder of light beamed through the second ring into the ground. All right, time for the first trial. I felt the nerves start up in my stomach. Trent sensed this and hopped out of the truck. It was raining quite hard now, though it was still warm. Both Trent and I were soaked, but that hardly concerned us. He reached out and put his hand on my shoulder. I know you're feeling scared, he said, but trust me on this. You're gonna do fine. Just keep in mind what we talked about. Stay a spectator. Okay? I looked into his blue eyes, which seemed especially gray in the dark. Still, Trent's voice was reassuring. All I had to do was trust him, trust myself, trust my dad, and it was all going to turn out right. I'm ready, I said. Trent was still for a second, holding my eyes in his. He then guided me behind the outer ring and into the cylinder of light. Should I step into it now? I asked, afraid to be called away immediately. It's not on yet, don't worry. I still have to press another button. I followed Trent's instructions and stood in the blue light which was centered on my chest. Then I watched as Trent ran into the back of the van and posted up next to the glass eye. Ready? He yelled out. It was hard to hear him over the rain, but I yelled back, Ready! The next thing I saw was a blinding blue light beam from the van. I heard what sounded like a laser, and then I saw a cylinder oscillate, expanding and compressing. When the energy reached the second ring, I saw everything around me light up. It looked brighter than noon on a cloudless day. Then the oscillations made their way to me, and I was swallowed up whole. When I came to, I was in the back seat of a car. I felt my butt rumbling. Everything was dim and quiet. And then I heard a woman's voice from in front of me. Mark, please, not with Lauren in the back. The man, who I now identified as my father, pulled a cigarette away from his lips and blew the smoke at my mom. He eyed the back of the seat where I was sitting, using one of the 5 markers that hadn't rolled off my lap to color a rabbit in my animal coloring book. Kid's fine, he said, and he took another drag. Mark, my mom repeated. I saw my dad raise his hand in a rapid motion. I said, she's fine, Cheryl. Now check the map and make sure we're going the right way. I can't see shit with all this fog. I took a moment to make sure I was really in the back seat, and I patted myself. I clearly had weight. Then I tried touching the car. At first my fingertips met a solid surface, but when I tried to press through, my hand slipped into the car. I quickly pulled my hand away as if I had reached into a fire, and that's when I heard the little 3-year-old next to me start crying. I turned and saw that little me had dropped another couple markers onto the ground and was struggling to reach them. Hey, what did I say about crying? Quit it, Mark. She just dropped her markers, said my mom. She turned to help me pick them up. What did you say to me? Mark spat with a voice full of guile. He reached out and pushed her back into her seat. Don't, he commanded. She has to learn how to deal with life. Deal? My mom started in disbelief. Deal with life? Do you hear yourself? What's gotten into you? Sometimes shit happens. It doesn't give her the right to cry. You helping her's just gonna reinforce her behavior. Her behavior? What about your behavior? You're acting like a total dick. I didn't even have a moment to react before my dad's hand was across my mom's face. I felt the slap more than I heard it, my own face seeming to swell with the force of the blow. I saw my mom cover her mouth and lean away. The little me began to cry even louder, which only challenged my dad to step up his own volume. Everyone needs to get a fucking grip before I crash this car, my dad shouted, and took another drag. The scariest part was I couldn't tell if he was warning us or threatening us. I felt a sudden urge to do something. There was no way this was real. I was definitely in some fantasy concocted by the demon. He wanted me to turn against my dad. That was the only explanation for something like this. My dad was a good man. Not this. As I contemplated what to do, a golden light appeared behind Little Me's window. Apparently she saw it too, because her cries hushed as she traced the wisp with her eyes. After a second, the wisp transformed into a bunny rabbit, reminiscent of the one she was coloring. The rabbit hopped alongside the window and then did a couple circles in place. I watched Little Me let out a playful laugh and reach towards the window.
"What's going on back there?"
My dad asked with a scowl. Apparently the only sound more disturbing than cries were laughs. I looked back to the front and saw my mom wiping the blood from her lip. Her expression was miserable. "Just leave her alone, Mark."
"I'll do what I damn well want to, Cheryl. It's my kid back there."
My mom was quiet. When I looked back towards the rabbit, it was no longer a rabbit, but a person, or at least it looked like a person. The figure radiated pure gold, and atop his head was what appeared to be a king's crown. I recalled Allison's experience with seeing the sunlight figure in her moment of distress. Was that what was happening here? Was this really all true?
"Hey!"
My dad shouted, eyeing Little Me from the rearview window.
"What are you reaching at?"
I looked and saw the golden figure extending his hand towards the window, and Little Me's hand was reaching back.
Mom? Dad? It's bright.
Little Me said. "What's bright, honey?" My mom asked.
"Don't encourage her, Cheryl."
Someone there.
Little Me shouted rapidly, and then dropped the rest of the markers in the coloring book onto the ground.
Who's there?
My mom asked.
"Cheryl, I swear to God, sit the fuck down."
Everything from that moment on happened so quickly that I barely had any time to process it. My mom lifted out of her seat to either get Little Me's attention or to help me pick up the coloring book. My dad responded by grabbing onto her throat, letting go of the steering wheel entirely. He threw her back against the car door, and her head hit the window so hard the glass cracked. My dad dropped his cigarette, and I could smell the smoke coming from under his seat, but that didn't seem to bother him at all. He turned toward Little Me at the same moment my 3-year-old hand reached out and grabbed onto the golden figure, whose hand diffused through the window. When my dad turned, I got a whiff of the most awful smell that I wouldn't have been able to place had I not had that nightmare last night. He grabbed onto Little Me's shoulder and tugged her away from the golden figure that was trying to pull her the other way. My dad's facade began to crack, and I could see those dark bugs crawling out from the pores in his arms, marching down towards Little Me. I reacted. I grabbed onto my dad's arm and pulled him off Little Me. I heard the sound of my shirt ripping as it was torn from his grip and pulled out of the car, diffusing through it like a ghost. My brief victory was immediately overturned as I saw what was now clearly the demon smiling at me. His wretched fingers curled around my forearm.
Got you.
Then the whole world once again diffused into countless numbers of particles. Only this time, instead of riding through it, I felt like I was falling through an elevator shaft with each floor darker than the last. The farther I fell, the less I became aware of my surroundings, and the more I felt the deep sense of loneliness. It was as if I was the only person in the whole world, and the whole world was a prison designed entirely for me. This went on for so long, I began to forget who I was, where I was, what I was. And then I landed.